Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Henry George School, to the first of a series of money talks. And we all know that money talks in our society. You know, it makes a difference. Well, we're going to be talking about the actual system of money, which is not taught to our high school or university students. And it's the way they control our society, and we don't get our needs met the way we should. So we have speakers from out of town today. We're very lucky. The first speaker is Joe Bongiovanni. Joe lives down in Virginia, but he's up here. He gave a talk at the Eastern Economics Association yesterday, and so we got him to come, and he's going to talk about financial instability. You know, those ups and downs of recession, depression, asset bubbles, losing jobs, getting jobs, all of that. And Joe is the director of the Kettle Pond Institute and also a member of the American Monetary Institute, and a really good guy, a long-term monetary reformer, structural change of our monetary system. Joe?
Thank you. I'm hoping I don't need this microphone. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna turn this off. Okay, thank you, Sue, and thank you to the Henry George School for inviting me to come over and have a little bit of a talk about what I consider to be a kind of a linchpin in arriving at our monetary understandings, because it comes from a guy, Dr. Hyman Minsky, who's very much popularized by various post-Keynesian movements, because he was a post-Keynesian and a heterodox economist, and so he's also the champion of the modern monetary theory people who are advancing their own ideas, but however they don't really get Minsky, in my opinion. You know, even though they make him their champion, they don't really get Minsky. And to me, this paper that was written by Hyman Minsky, Dr. Hyman Minsky, is the most significant, piece of research, economic research that I really have found. And so I've been trying to popularize his study here and his conclusions as to where he's going. So I titled this as Financial Instability, which is what Minsky's known for. Minsky's known for his study of as Sue said, the boom and bust cycle of capitalism. The boom and bust cycles of capitalism. Now, some people just say the boom and bust cycle, but we know it's the boom and bust cycles of financial capitalism that actually causes the suffering that comes on the end of it for ordinary people. And so Dr. Minsky, when he graduated from being a university professor at Washington University, moved over to the Levy Economic Institute at Bard College to take on his own research, to begin to do his own research unfettered by having an academic tie, and he did some of his his greatest work there. But I really have to admit that even though this paper was written in 1994, I really only discovered it about 4 years ago. And when I discovered it, it began a whole new kind of turn of events for me, because I'm a lifelong monetary reformer, about 40 years I've been studying the monetary system because my dad studied the monetary system. And eventually he hit me with a 2x4 that got my attention, and that 2x4 was a paper that was written by Dr. Frederick Soddy titled The Role of Money. And anybody who hasn't read that book should really understand the role of money, because it is the role of money that has been, how shall I say, corrupted, if you will, from what it needs to be in every society, which is the distributive mechanism of the wealth that is created in the society. The role of money is to distribute the wealth that is created. And it can either happen the way it's happening right now, which is that all the wealth gets concentrated into the very wealthy, and for the bottom 10 or 20%, they're sorry, but there's nothing left. And that's because we have a corrupted monetary system. Now, my point there, I think, is going to be corroborated by Dr. Minsky. So here is this is actually the title page from his paper, working paper number 127. And so I'm the leader of the coming 127 movement. Okay, the 127 movement is going to be about taking back the monetary system now on the basis of Minsky. So he starts out this paper. This is really the first line of the first chapter of it. He says the definition of the problem. Let's state the problem that we're going to be dealing with. And this is how he says it. Banking plays two roles in a modern capitalist economy. It supplies the means of payments, provides the money that we need to exchange goods, and it channels resources into the capital development of the economy. Now that's economists speak to me, okay? I mean, they determine the world that we live in. That's what that really means. So that's how he said it. And in looking at this, over several times, I will only tell you that I would have paraphrased this one sentence, because I think he leaves out kind of a building block that we need. I would have made the sentence say, in a modern capitalist economy, banking plays two roles. So that we know that what we're dealing with on the outset is that modern capitalist economy. Banking plays two roles. It provides the money that we need, and it provides the capital for the capital development of the economy, meaning they take the money and they do with it as they wish, because it's their money to create and to use. And that's part of the problem. Everything that I have here that I post here will be just some quotes from the paper. And I encourage everybody to read this paper, because to me this is the most important paper that we're going to have to rely on as we go about bringing about what I consider to be the evolution of the money system that it serves the public. So again, this is just another quote. He says these developments, and that is again, the banking system being the ruler of our society. These developments suggest that the role in the economy of government organizations needs to be reviewed. Now, to me, that's a statement. These developments, the power of the banks, the ability to create the society that we live in, suggests that the role of government organization needs to be reviewed. Now, he goes on. He's more specific, because he says central banks broadly defined. Broadly defined, I'm going to say monetary authority, government authority, et cetera, to supervise, regulate, and examine banks, supervisory, regulatory, to control the growth of the money supply, of the bank money, and to assure that the bank liabilities, which are the demand deposits, that function as part of the payment mechanism, are always available at par. So keeping the payment system going is one of the most important things that the Fed does, and that is a critical thing that goes on. But that's because we use the bank money for money, and if we use something else for money, the payment system would still be important, but it wouldn't be important in regard to the bank liabilities. So Minsky's statement here, after he states the problem in one sentence, he says the role of government needs to be reviewed, and that is an important, I think, thing to take home. Now this next quote is here just to clarify and to kind of deepen that consideration, because he's an economic researcher. In general, the discourse on economic policy takes place on two planes. Now, I eliminated the first plane because the first plane is the one that we kind of talk about the most and have to do it. But he says the second plane is that of legislation, and he calls it administrative decisions, that affect the structure and operations of banking and financial markets, and government involvement in setting rules that constrain and contain banking and financial markets. Now, if there's anything that, to me, is like, if there's anything that's been said that we need to recognize that needs to be done, that needs to be part of our economic reality in the future, that's it. We need to change the government's involvement in setting rules that constrain and contain banking and financial markets. And he says, now that's the second plane, and he said this paper concentrates on policies of the second plane, legislating institutions and usages of money. Now this one's in here. I had taken it out and put it back in, but he makes a statement here that I think is really important. And he says every economic policy argument, and I'm making one, okay, reflects a maintained economic theory, and he was making one. It says it behooves anyone who analyzes and advocates economic policy to make where she or he is coming from clear. We have to say where we're coming from clear. I'm a monetary reformer. I'm a public money advocate. That's where I'm coming from. He says this comment is written from the perspective of the financial instability hypothesis interpretation of the general theory of Keynes. Now, why do I really have that in? I have that in there because I want to make sure that everybody understands what broad perspective he's taking in making this paper available. He takes the general theory of Keynes and interprets it through his financial instability hypothesis, through his study of boom and bust cycles, to his study of what is wrong with capitalism, I'm going to say, as we know it. And so he says, this comment is written from that perspective. And I think that's important. This is not a narrow, application of some idea that floated through his mind. This is the whole enchilada when it comes to Dr. Hyman Minsky. He says, this theory holds that periods of incoherent behavior occur as a natural outcome. And you got to kind of focus on that little phrase there for a minute. Incoherent behavior occur as a matter of natural outcome, okay, of the interactions between flows of income, payment flows due to financial commitments, and the prices of assets determined in markets. Now, being not an economist, being not a person who studies the money system with the view of how it actually works in fine detail within the economy, I narrowed this down to say interactions between flows of income and flows of payments. Because payments are made when due. If you don't have a due payment, you don't make a payment. So we reduce payments to the payment of a payment due, which is a debt. Okay? And we reduce incomes, because he usually talks about it in terms of gross capital incomes, to incomes. So those are the two things that we have to deal with, that we're going to have to deal with. Debts in a debt-based money society, and incomes to pay the debts. He says these interactions reflect the essential characteristic of a capitalist economy that is simultaneously an income-generating and a financial system. So he says that's the structure that we have to keep in mind as we deal with his as we deal with his modest proposal. He said, and now he goes on to say, in the theory Keynes developed upon which the financial instability hypothesis is built, and he just explained how that was all in there, money and finance are in general not neutral. Again, to me, one of the most prescient observations that you can make is that there's a morality to monetary economics. There's a morality to how money drives what society becomes and determines what society becomes. They're not neutral. They have significant, in fact, determinative outcomes with regard to the national economy. In particular, he says, changes in monetary and financial institutions will affect the path of the economy over time. Now, why is that so important and significant to me? That's what we want. We want to change the path of the economy over time because we cannot keep going on the path of the economy that we have today. We cannot keep going there. We're really at the dead end. We're really at the dead end of the capitalist society. A lot of people are talking about it, but nobody's really talking about it causally, as is Dr. Minsky here. And most importantly, very few people are talking about how do we get to realize, to understand what's possible in the future as an alternative to finance capitalism, modern finance capitalism. But what he's saying is that the changes in the institutions will change the path of the economy over time. I'm just going further and a little bit deeper into the paper on each of these. In the financial instability hypothesis, business cycles mainly result from interactions. Interactions between payment commitments for debts, which arise in the process of financing investments and positions in capital assets, and then the flow of gross capital income, but again, there's gross capital income, which are determined by the structure of aggregate demand. So in other words, he's saying by the economy moving forward and creating the demand in the economy, we need to finance investments in order to achieve the prosperity that it might make available. But in developing and then maintaining and so that structure of debt, those payment commitments, if we don't have adequate incomes, then we're going to have this, Then we're going to have this. This is what it's all about. Pro-cyclicality of using debt for money. And when I say that, fractional reserve banking as we know it, which is the system that the bankers put in place in 1913. So he says business cycles are endogenous in capitalist economies. Now that's another, I feel, salient observation on Minsky's part. He says they're endogenous. They're internally generated. They're internally generated in capitalist economies that we have booms and busts. Can there be any doubt about it? And is that a way to move forward in terms of having the economy that we need to deal with, especially right now with the demands of investment in climate sustainability today? How are we going to do that if we have to go through these booms and bust cycles of a capitalist economy? And the answer is we can't. That's the real answer. We can't. Here's a way another way how he states it. In our complex world, households, governments, foreign governments, and enterprises have outstanding debts. In other words, in a debt-based economy, if you're part of that debt-based economy, whether you're a household and a business and or a government, you have to have debts, okay? You have to have debts. However, he adds, gross capital incomes can be either more than sufficient, or insufficient to fulfill the payment commitments made during prior financings. So he says, we might have the incomes to pay those debts. We're going to all have the debts, and we might have the incomes to pay those debts. And what happens if we don't have the incomes to pay those debts? Because that's where we are right now, when everybody's living one paycheck again, away from chaos, really. So he says, we all have the debts, and we might have incomes to pay those debts. And there they are. Those are the two things, again, debts and incomes, debts and incomes. We have insufficient income in the economy today. Anybody that doesn't realize that is not looking at it, just not looking at the income aspect of it. So here is where, because I go into public money economics, my postulation here is that public money economics is where Minsky was heading. And in fact, I'm going to make a prediction that says in 20 years or in 25 years, public money economics is going to occupy a huge part of the business school that's being taught at that time. Because we are going to have to replace this money system, and public money is what's going to come out of that. And teaching how public money actually works is going to be an actual job, the one that they wouldn't let Paul Krugman have, by the way. If anybody knows the history of Paul Krugman, when he went to Princeton, they said, what do you want to study, Paul? You're a bright young guy. And he said, I've been thinking about studying money. And they said, if you want to publish papers and be an economist and get a job teaching and maybe even get a Nobel Prize someday, you better forget about money, okay? You just better forget about money, because we don't do that. But in the future, we are going to be doing that. That's my promise to you. In the future, we are going to be doing that, because there's no other really decent method by which we can introduce money into the economy unless it's public money, unless it's issued without debt, and unless it's permanently issued and stays in circulation, as all public money does. Much of the economic history of the United States could be written in terms of attempts to get money right. Now that's consistent with pretty much everybody. All the monetary historians would tell you that. You know, our economic history is written about trying to get money right. He says, after a particular monetary banking and financing structure has failed, either economically or politically, a new structure is put in place. And he says, the history of reform and subsequent failure, followed by another round of reform, reflects those two not completely compatible. Those two not completely compatible. He's stating they're not completely compatible. I say they're incompatible, okay? Requirements placed upon monetary and banking system to provide a safe and sound medium of exchange and to furnish channels for financing of the capital development of the economy. The history of the economic system in this country is replete with taking structures and trying them, and taking different structures, taking reforms and trying them, you know, getting different measures put in place and trying them, and then the banks always deregulating and getting power back and have another boom and bust cycle. And he says they are the two not completely compatible requirements. And then his next thing he says is there may very well be a mismatch between the structure of the Federal Reserve System and the manner in which it interacts with the economy. Now, the reason I let this one statement stand out here by itself is because he terms it the Federal Reserve System. He says the structure of the Federal Reserve System. Well, the Federal Reserve System is the name of the money and banking system in this country. So, okay, so to me, he's saying there may be a mismatch between the money and banking system in this country and the manner in which it interacts with the economy. That is to say, it is leaving us without achieving the benefits that and the production of wealth should be providing to the people that are creating the wealth. Excuse me. He says, going on, an additional and equally important reason for the absence of a deep depression in big government capitalism, here he's raising the government role. He's talking about big government capitalism. A fall in investment does not mean that capital incomes collapse, which is what normally happened in a deep recession. And I would say a fall in investment doesn't mean that incomes collapse. This is because the government deficits are the equivalent of investment in sustaining aggregate capital incomes. And I'll go back and rephrase that. Government deficits are equivalent of investment, are equivalent in sustaining incomes. That's what they are. Government deficits are consistent in sustaining incomes. We need to have the sustaining income on the income side of the economy and the budget in order to pay the bills on the development side of the budget that have to be capitalized. So to me, this is such a salient point. I say here, hello post-Keynesians, hello progressives, and hello non-aligned heterodox economists. Please inform Grover. Please inform the Republican economists. Go bigger government budgets, period. Okay? Well, that's what it takes in order to have the incomes, to pay the bills, have a bigger government budget. Don't finance it by debt, by the way, but have a bigger government budget. And then he looks at it from the other side. He says a policy posture that aims at portfolio conservatism, that is to say the downward side of the economy, portfolio conservatism, by creating crunches and threats of debts and debt deflations, will lower economic growth by lowering the overall ratio of attained GDP to potential GDP. You know, again, I'm not an economist, but so I can give you my thumbnail sketch of what that means. Potential GDP. It just means, you know, how much economic throughput can there be in the national economy of wealth, okay, which is what the economy is really all about, is wealth production. How much can there be given the limitations of the boom and bust cycle? And basically what he's saying is that gap between attained GDP and potential GDP grows in periods of economic constraint, in periods of economic downturn, in periods of the bust of the economy. And of course, I always say, please read that one twice. So again, back to the public money side of it. In his policy discussions, he goes on to talk about 100% money on the National Banking Act. Now, I just want to qualify this a little bit because Dr. Minsky has always been working and is working here from the concept of fractional reserve versus full reserve banking. okay? And Irving Fisher was, you know, the biggest proponent of full reserve banking. And the object, if you read Fisher's papers, even in the economics textbooks about central banking, what he says is that the move to full reserve banking will provide the stability that is needed in the banking system so that we can have an alleviation of the boom and bust cycle. So Fisher has been throughout a stability interested economist, and Minsky here is picking up on it. Finally, some people might say finally, but it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that he crossed that bridge, and when he was crossing that bridge, he gave us a lot of documentation to follow. Now, I'm not going to actually read this, but basically what he says is that if we go to full reserve banking as one option, okay, that we can actually meet the needs of 100% money, which was where Fisher was writing from, okay? So Minsky's saying, Fisher's right, we can get to financial stability by achieving full reserve banking. Now, we're beyond full reserve banking. And if anybody here hasn't read Dr. Joseph Huber's book, and the title of which is Sovereign Money Beyond Reserve Banking, you should, because we need to be thinking in the new paradigm, and the new paradigm is not tied to the old paradigm. It's a rejection of the old paradigm of reserve banking, and we're going to move into real money economics. But Minsky didn't go there, and Fisher didn't go there because they weren't there yet, and this concept really is more of a more modern one. So, says Minsky, thus as the 21st century is about to be ushered in, remember he wrote it in '94, an idea which was on the table during the 1930s, discussion of reform, can once again be on the table. Can once again be on the table. Should once again be on the table. Must once again be on the table. That's my take on it. Okay, one virtue of the 100% money scheme is that it separates the two functions that the monetary and banking system has to perform, the provision of a safe and secure means of payment and the capital development of the economy. My take on the bottom, institutional separation of the money creator issuer from the capital developers must be structurally and systemically accomplished as a public policy virtue. Okay? And that's why I'm so big on Dr. Hyman Minsky's working paper number 127, because to me he says it all. He goes from there. Okay, by the way, I threw this in here because I was agreeing with him before I realized he was even writing this. Okay, now this is a paper that I wrote for the Global Economic Intersection several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, in which I titled "The Problem with Money and Banking is Inseparability." We can't have money without banking. We can't have money without debt. We can't have money without credit. We can't have money without finance, okay? And that's the problem. We need to be able to have money without any of those things, and then have credit based on those things. That's fine, but not to have money based on it. And so anyway, I wrote this paper back then, and I thought that the wording kind of fit where he was at. Now, this is, again, from 1994 observation about what's happening with money and banking and seeing the problems there and how he's going to talk about it. He said the progress to a small number of banks, each one of which is too big to fail, and then he throws in this other kind of clause, with maximum credit lines so large that the conditions of supply of credit to large borrowers will improve relative to the conditions of supply of credit to the small borrowers. He says, progress to a small number of banks, each too big to fail, seems to be the most likely outcome of what is now taking place. So again, is this a prescient observation? Well, it was. Of course, for those of us who were fighting against interstate banking in the 80s, this is what we said was going to happen too. Not that we were so smart, but we knew that we didn't want interstate banking to happen. But this is Dr. Hyman Minsky saying that this is what's going to happen, and sure enough, we had the growth, and continued to have the huge growth of the biggest banks, and the community banks becoming less and less able to meet the credit needs of their communities. partially because of their inability to take on risk. So this is Minsky's modest proposal. So this is where I say, Minsky's post-capitalism proposal, public money economics. And I've already shown how he's drawn out on Fisher's 100% money and public money constructs as being something that should be on the table. So he wrote his modest proposal. It's only 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph says, the time has come to open a national inquiry into the structure of the banking and financial system. Now, I left this sentence out in one I did yesterday. The radical changes now underway in technology, computing, and communication mean that much of what we may now have may be obsolete. Much of what we now have in the way of finance capitalism may be obsolete for the needs of the progressive democracy. The sluggish economy of the past decades, combined with the apparent reluctance of the Federal Reserve to give full employment to chance. The Federal Reserve? Or the banking and monetary system and the financialistas? Which ones are not giving full employment a chance? And to me, it's it's in the capital development of the economy that they're not giving full employment a chance. So to me, it's the financialization of the economy that prevents money being channeled into creating the jobs that full employment require, and or a other mechanism for achieving incomes. Again, incomes is the important thing here. Incomes is the important thing to consider. Can mean that our financing structures are not consistent with the needs of a progressive democracy. Now again, this is my note on the bottom. In 1994, Dr. Hyman Minsky observed that finance capitalism itself might not be consistent with the needs of a progressive democracy. And I thank Dr. Hyman Minsky for saying that. And this is the second paragraph of his modest proposal. In the past, serious changes were the result of a serious public inquiry. I suggest that enough is amiss in our financial and banking structures that it is time to go back to the drawing board and determine what the monetary, financial, and financing arrangement should be in the 21st century. Financing arrangements. How do we achieve climate balancing? How do we achieve the Green New Deal? Financing arrangements. That's what it's going to be about. And he's saying it's not, they need to be looked at for the 21st century. And he says in order to achieve that, a late 20th century National Monetary Commission should be on the public policy agenda. So to me, to say that we need a National Monetary Commission is to acknowledge that the present monetary system, which is a banking and monetary system, which is a banking, monetary, and financial system, is not working. It is broken at the core. It is systematically insufficient. And we need to do something else. And how do we get to that something else? You know, I can tell you my idea. You know, my idea is we pass the Kucinich bill, we take back the power to create money to the government, and the government issues the money. That's my take on it, okay? But I need to go to the I want to be able to go to the National Monetary Commission and make that argument. And I'm prepared to do it. I'm eager to do it, quite frankly. But as Minsky said, a late 20th century National Monetary should be on the public policy agenda. And if you remember the title, Financial Instability and the Decline of Banking, with a question mark, because really when you come to the end of this thing, it's not the decline of banking at all. There's not a decline of banking, there's a decline of the monetary arrangements that give us the boom and bust cycles. That's what's coming to an end, not banking. Banking, in my opinion, is going to flourish and is going to become a whole new series of institutions that relate to the depositors' desires of having loan policies. So he says that should be on the agenda, and that's pretty much all in for reform. So to me, you don't get a research economist or an economist. that goes more to the issue of getting the needs of the progressive democracy on paper than was written in this paper by Dr. Hyman Minsky, his working paper number 127. I hope you'll all read it, and I hope you'll all take it and accept it as the banner leadership document that we need to get through this 21st century. And that's my point. And I thank you very much for listening. And I'm glad to take questions. I don't know if that's the appropriate thing to do at this point or not, but I'm glad to. Oh, yeah, okay, great.
How do you go about making that change, which sounds so logical and the potential is tremendous? Does that come from the public? I mean, is our public smart enough, aware enough to get this thing going? I could read all this. What do I have to do for me? What do I have to do to help the economy? Who sets this in motion? What am I doing wrong?
Nothing. Especially you're not thinking wrong. I did turn it off. I'm sorry. It was good.
It's working. Hello? No.
Hello.
Yeah.
This concept of yours and what Minsky is saying, if you recognize what is happening in our society right now, just take Mr. Trump, who needs all this money to build a wall.
Yeah.
How do we get that type of situation changed? What does the average man, woman do? It seems to me that the average individual doesn't understand all of this, and most people don't even know how to handle their own finances. So how are they going to be able to set in motion what has to be done for the whole public?
Okay.
That's my question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Because first thing I want to point out is Dr. Minsky's realization and his statement of the reality that's apparently there, in recognizing that the work of Irving Fisher to bring about a public money system, which was Irving, that is, first of all, I want you to understand, a very old concept. Okay, that is to say that when we got the private banking system of the Federal Reserve and it achieved its first crash, a school of economists got together and said, we need to fix this, and this is how we need to fix it. And that's how he said we need to fix it. Okay, that's how they said we need to fix it. That was in 1933, and that was the proposal that went to FDR. And there have been many studies, not to say papers that have been written, and especially by Fisher, and in fact the most important one as a model for what we would call modern capitalism, was written by Fisher and Paul Douglas, an economist at the University of Chicago, and Frank Graham, and three other deans of economics in the country. And they stated that the economists really need to do this and to figure this out. And so they wrote this paper that was called in 1939 Program for Monetary Reform. They proposed it, and they sent it out to all the academic economists in the country. And they said, what do you think about this? Now, I promise you, it was a full-blown public money proposal. It was a proposal that says we stop the banks from creating money, we set up a monetary authority within the government, and we have the government issue the money on our behalf without issuing debt. And that paper was circulated to all of the economists, and by about an 80% margin, it was supported. It was publicly supported by over 400 economists who put their name on the support documents. So my point is that this is an old, historic, scientific resource that's available to us. And now we've come to the point where about 5 or 6 years ago, through the work of the American Monetary Institute and Congressman Dennis Kucinich and John Conyers of Michigan, they introduced a bill into the Congress to do exactly this, okay? So we already have the economic model that we need, that Minsky was talking about, would be the outcome of his monetary commission. We already have that. It's available in legislation right now that your congressperson could support. I promise. I promise. I don't leave that promise empty. I put my email address up there, and I will be glad to talk to you about that further. So my point is that every person can be advocating that their congressperson be sponsoring bringing back the Kucinich bill, because what happened, Dennis Kucinich introduced that into Congress. The next year, they gerrymandered him out of office, and when I say that, by redistricting. And so we didn't have an advocate in Congress. But what you're saying is so true, because as Paul Krugman realized when he got to Princeton and said he wanted to study money, and they said, we don't give degrees in money. Now imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine that we have a monetary system, and that people want to go to school to study this monetary system, and they don't let them do it. Is there, that's the, that's the kind of corruption of the process that's taking place. So my real only answer that I can give you is whatever you can, whatever you can do to help in terms of moving the solution forward. Without this type of a solution, climate change will not be financed. Solving climate change will not be financed. Without this type of a solution and the whole integrated economic solution, we will not be able to achieve the distribution of wealth and the betterment of our ecology that we need that we all need to survive, not just the animals, but all of us. And so you can only do what you can. I don't know even what congressional district I'm in right now, to be honest with you. But whoever it is needs to be getting a call about talking about reforming the monetary system, because debt will not get us there. We cannot get there by borrowing money. And by the way, that would be money that banks create out of nothing. So in other words, the banks create money out of nothing today. I didn't even get into what our monetary system is really about. But today, all the money is created by banks out of nothing by making loans. So instead of that, that would stop. Government would create all the money by spending it on programs that Congress agrees upon. That's how the money would be created. And banks would just lend that money. Banks would just be able to get that money and lend it out for all the things that they need. So the same amount of money would be created, you could say. Okay, there's not a need to say that there's any different amount. So the same amount of money would be created, but there would be no debt. And if it's okay, I want to take a minute, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand. And I don't know if any of you ever follow modern monetary theory a little bit. If you do, God help you. But the fact is that they have this thing called functional equivalence in modern monetary theory. They get by a lot of stuff by saying, well, that's functionally equivalent. Okay, so I was at the Minsky conference a few years ago. Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who's their primary advocate, was speaking, and she said that that the government could either print money. That this was in the narrative, could either print money or borrow. Okay, so she says, well, we have a hard time borrowing. And I asked a question from the audience after. I said, well, why not print the money? And she turned to her colleague, Dr. Scott Fulbauer, and he said, oh, I agree. He says it's the same thing. Okay, it's the same thing. Okay, let me explain how different it is. Okay, on the one hand, we're $22 trillion in debt. You and me and our government are $22 trillion in debt to the people that are holding our paper in the name of this nation. We are in debt by $22 trillion. If we were not in debt by $22 trillion, if the government had created the money, we would have $22 trillion in assets. Okay? So we would have $22 trillion to the good. And so what's the difference? It's $44 trillion. So if people don't understand why we need to have a change in the way that we create money and issue money, and money comes into circulation and develops our economy and seeks to achieve prosperity, that's a good reason. 44 trillion, that's a pretty good reason. And I hope I'm not shorting the answer to your question. I wasn't trying to, but because everybody feels, because money is so not understood, and I came to understand money because my dad taught it to me. And I'll give you guys a warning. I'm the only student that I know of the Sadi Bongiovanni School of Money. I'm the only student I know. And I'm still a student because I'm still talking and I'm still learning every day. But I'm a high school graduate. And I learned about money from my dad, who was an 8th grade dropout. Okay? So some people would say that we don't have enough economic understanding. And I challenge anybody on it. I challenge anybody on it. Why do I want to go to the National Monetary Commission? Because I think my dad taught me well, because he learned it through the Sadi School, Frederick Sadi School, who was a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and come to realize that the benefits of science don't go to mankind, but to corporations and to military. And so he got out of study of physical science and got into the study of economics, and eventually into the study of monetary system, and came to the conclusion that that's the problem. We don't have a real monetary system, and we need a real monetary system that's based on real money. It's as simple as that. Alan.
You mentioned the Kucinich bill. I was wondering, could you be a little more specific about that bill for those who haven't heard about it?
Well, I could be, but Jamie Walton is in the room, and
Okay.
I would like to, I always defer to Jamie on the Kucinich bill because he's the one that did it. So if that's okay,
Great.
I don't want
Speaker
to
we
avoid
need.
it, but I'm a big champion of it myself. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
So, in the end, the suggestion about public money, it seems to cut out private banking and just turn them into service providers and not into like money makers.
You got it right. You got it right. Well, basically, when people learn about what the banks do, they think of them as intermediaries between savers and borrowers. That's how they think of them. They think, oh, well, I put my money in the bank and my bank lends my money out to somebody else, and that's not what happens at all. The bank keeps your money, and that's their reserve against the loans that they're going to make, but then they create the money to make the loan. So the banks create all the money. All the amount of money in circulation today will grow tomorrow, and that will all be new money that the banks created and lent out for whatever purposes. So we want to change that. Not that the banks won't be making the loans. We want the banks to make the loans. We want the banks to make all the loans that are needed in order to achieve the wealth production that's capable in the economy. We want the banks to do all of that, but we don't want them to create money when they do it.
So in essence then, in other words, that's why things get out of control with boom and bust, because there's no control on money supply. In other words, whenever they want to boom and bust, they just ramp up the initiative to increase the debt. The private banking industry does that.
And then pull the string.
Yeah. They make money on the way up, okay, because everybody's expectations are rising, so more people will take out debt. Okay, then there's more debt out there. And then there comes a point in time when they are capable of decreasing by not increasing, because you create more debt, so just by not increasing. And then by having a downturn in which they constrain the issuance of money, and then there's not enough money to pay the debts out there. And then what happens? The banks lend out the money, have security against the loans that are made, and get to acquire the assets that are pledged as security for the loans. So you think about it. I don't want to, my dad used to always tell me, don't vilify the bankers. The bankers are just dealing with the system that they've been given. And that any banker would be doing the same thing. So they're trying to make money in competition with the other bankers, okay? At all times, every day, all day, 24 hours a day, they're trying to make more money than the other bankers. So the system operates to their benefit without consideration of our benefit. That's how I would put my answer to that. The considerations are for private gain And by the way, that's what the preface of Dr. Frederick Soddy's book on the role of money is all about, okay, in which he warns against turning our means for distributing wealth over to the private bankers, which we've done, and he said if we did that, we would end up exactly where we are today. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, I'll have the slides. So, who's coming next? Yeah. Who's going next, Andy or Jamie?
That's up to Jamie, I guess.
Really? Okay, Jamie, you wanna? Okay.
Okay, so our next speaker is Jamie Walton. He's going to be speaking now about money and democracy
And sustainability.
and sustainability. Very important issue. Thanks.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamie Walton. I'm been with the American Monetary Institute off and on since about 2008. And the American Monetary Institute was founded by Stephen Zarlenga, who has a long association with this place here. So there's probably quite a few of you who knew Stephen. He unfortunately passed away about 2 years ago. But we're carrying on. And so I'm really like to thank Ibrahima for reaching out and inviting us to do these presentations, and I know that a lot of the people in the Henry George School here have been involved with AMI and other issues, and bringing those into the conversation in the Henry George arena, and I think that this is going to just be a continuation of the good relationship that we have, and that my hope and intent is that we all continue to talk to each other and communicate and work together, because I think that all of the things that we're proposing are all necessary, and I think that we're stronger together, and we can all help each other. So thank you very much, and I'll get into it now. How do I advance the slide?
Try the click once to get rid of that. And then try the page down key.
Oh, page down. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so as Joe would have covered in his talk, Dr. Hyman Minsky explained why we have this situation. Now that looks like a barcode, doesn't it? That's just how many recessions there's been in that period. And so like the Henry George people, like the Norm people that Randy's going to be talking about, we think there's something wrong with the system. I don't know how it can be any more clear than looking at this picture here. So I think that's why I think that the organisations and groups that think that there's something wrong with the system, and I think that's a lot of people, even if it's not at the back of their mind, I think a lot of people know there's something wrong. And when we had the last financial crash in 2008, and the people who caused it got bailed out, and the people who had nothing to do with causing it lost their homes, lost their jobs, I I think everybody understands on a basic level that's really unfair and immoral. And so I think all of us really, what drives us is that we want a system and we want to live in a society that is fair and moral. So there are a lot of people, we come across a lot of people who want to defend the system as it is. They say there's nothing wrong with it, it's just that, oh, some people are greedy or something, some excuse. But I'm losing patience with those people because, you know, we're due for another one of these, you know, any time now. So like Joe was saying, and he referenced what Paul Krugman wrote when he first started to look into studying economics, and he was told, don't look at money. Don't look at money. And so it's sort of a missing piece in most economics or mainstream economics literature. It's very strange. And so instead of looking at money, they've a whole sort of mystery has been surrounded around money, and that's why Stephen Zelenga's book, The Lost Science of Money, the subtitle of it is The Mythology of Money, the Story of Power. Because by shrouding money in mystery, that's how the power has been projected throughout history, throughout the last 5,000 years of history, by keeping people confused about money. And so this false dichotomy has been built up between money as a commodity, like gold or something like that, or money as credit, like it's just an IOU, a promise to pay. And so there's this, you know, whenever people do talk about money, they're either talking about one or the other, and they're sort of missing out something in the middle. Now, what is that? Well, we say that money is in the middle between commodities and credit. So I hope this graphic is clear. So Stephen Zelenga's, the main title of his book, The Lost Science of Money, he basically, he wanted to write a book about the history of money, and he didn't know exactly where it was going to end up. He actually had thought that gold might need to be a part of it, because he sort of, that was his background. But what he did, he had studied physics at the University of Chicago, and then he studied political science, and then he studied psychology. And he was in the last year of what was called the Hutchins program, which was teaching critical thinking, and part of that was to actually study the original materials of the classics, like, you know, the Greek and Roman history and all that. Don't read about what other people said about them, actually go to the original source. And so he applied that methodology when he was doing his research for The Lost Science of Money. And it took him 12 years, and he was living basically on a shoestring for that 12 years, and he studied over 800 source materials, you know, most of them original materials. And he came to this conclusion. And his conclusion was that on money, Aristotle was quite a visionary. And this is a quote from Aristotle's Ethics, and I think it's really good. So I'm sure you've been able to read that. Whilst all goods must therefore be measured by some one thing. Now this unit is in truth demand. Money has become by convention a sort of representative of demand, and exists not by nature but by law. Money then acting as a measure makes good commensurate and equates them. And so the founding fathers of the US, some of them were quite knowledgeable about money. Benjamin Franklin was, and there were some others who were. And there were also some in there who wanted to start setting up banks and importing the system that had been prevailing in England and Europe. So, but they got this into the Constitution, and it's quite clear. And the word coin there, in that context, the lowercase is a verb. It means to create or to originate, like to coin a phrase. You come up with it. So we'll go back to that later. Now the Treasury, they say, yes, we have this power as well. It's constitutional power. And you know, as Joe mentioned, I was working with Congressman Kucinich in Washington DC, and with revising and reintroducing what's called the Need Act. And this bill went through about 5 years of fine-tuning and vetting through what's called the Legislative Council, which is like the people in Congress who draft the bills and make sure that it fits in with all the other laws and all that. And one of the things you have to do when you introduce a bill is that you have to say what the constitutional authority is for this bill. And so the constitutional authority for this bill is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution. So the Treasury acknowledges this. This is quotes that basically in every annual report of the US Mint. And this word, seniorage. Now, this is a word that's almost being removed from the vocabulary. What Stephen Zelenga found when he was studying the history of money and studying about economics and the way that economics is written about is that he found that definitions or language is used as a propaganda and war tactic, and definitions are the heavy artillery. So the way you define something, the way you define a term, and then you apply that excludes any other ideas coming into people's heads. And it's like, and if you sort of brush words under the carpet, then you can also brush the meaning of those words and the ideas and concepts of those words under the carpet as well. And so when you look at a lot of computer software and you type the word in seniorage in like an email or on a Word document or whatever, it'll come up with those red underlines. It doesn't recognize the word. So it's interesting. So seniorage adds to the government's cash balance, but unlike the payment of taxes or other receipts, it does not involve a transfer of financial assets from the public. Instead, it arises from the exercise of the government's sovereign power to create money. Okay, so it's not taking anything from anyone else. It's not taking money off you in the form of taxes. It's not fining you, or it's not requiring you to give up anything. It's a fresh issue of new money, and it's recognised as adding to the cash balance of the Treasury's assets. And that's how the difference between the value of minting coins, the face value, the legal value, and the cost of producing them. That's how it's recognised in the government's balance sheet. But of course, the coins are only like 0.2% of the money supply, so it's hardly anything. Okay, so money and democracy. What do they have in common? Well, they're both social inventions. They both belong to society as a whole. They should not be private. We have as Joe Bongiovanni has explained towards the end of this talk, we basically have a private money system which is rented to us. And we can only get if we go into debt and borrow it from a certain segment of society. Do you remember that Dr. Seuss story? I can't remember what it was called. It was basically some people, a population, and some of them had a star, were given a star, they were special, and then the others that didn't have the star, they weren't special, and it caused friction in the society. And so I don't think that there should be special privileges for any particular group or subsector in society. I think that either everybody has the right, or we put the right into our representatives in government, and they do it on our behalf, and we hold them to account. I think that's the way that it should work. I think that's fair. I don't think that there's a particular groups that should have special privileges that others don't. So that's why I say that money and democracy are bound together, and because otherwise, if you have this power to create money in private hands, you can have, even if our Congress was functional, the Congress could pass all sorts of laws that you might want, but if the power to actually put that into action is in other people's hands, it's not going to happen. It's, who has the upper hand, it's who's giving the money and who's receiving, and I don't see any reason why, when the Constitution says that Congress has this exclusive right, and through that, the federal executive government, there's no reason why the federal government should be begging, going cap in hand to private individuals or organisations. So now we'll get into a little bit of nitty-gritty, just to show you that all of this is already what should be. what we're proposing is what should be in the it's in the Constitution, it's in the legal and accounting framework as well. So this is the group of top accountants that work out the accounting system for the federal government, how it's supposed to, all the rules and procedures and policies for doing all of their accounting across the whole of the federal government, all the departments and agencies and instrumentalities. And so they recognise seniorage as well. This is a cut and paste from their handbook, and I'll blow it up here. Seniorage results from the sovereign power of the government to directly create money, and although not an inflow of resources from the public, does increase the government's net position in the same manner as an inflow of resources. Okay, and there's the reference, and it's still there. I check it every year to make sure they still have it in there. I'm worried that they're going to take it out sometime. Somebody's going to lobby them to take it out, but so far it hasn't happened. I shouldn't have even said that, maybe. Okay, so even the Federal Reserve, okay, even they recognise it, and it's hard to see, but they have this word seniorage there. You see that? And it's got a negative in front of it because it's a negative liability. And what that is the difference between the face value of the treasury coin and currency when there was US notes that were issued and circulated, and the cost of producing them. And it's amortized, the cost of producing was amortized as a liability, but the face value is out there, and the treasury has had the value of that recognised. And so what do they call that? They call that an instrument discrepancy. They call money a discrepancy.
Well, the
And the
Fed
money-
does,
Yeah, it's,
not the Treasury, but the Fed.
no, yes, this is the Federal Reserve. So in their way of thinking, because the Federal Reserve basically is a bank, and it was designed by bankers, and it works for bankers. It doesn't work for the government. It's basically excluded by law from working for the government. So in their way of thinking, that's a discrepancy. To be able to have an asset without, to being able to have a money asset without a money debt. But it exists, and they recognise it. And so what our legislation proposes is to make the whole of the money supply a discrepancy, because it's a very nice discrepancy to have. I can guarantee you on this. Okay, so on a balance sheet, it basically, instead of debt or liabilities increasing with assets, it's an asset that increases, and no liabilities increases, no debt increases. So it increases the equity or net position. So in those quotes, cash balance on the asset side and net position on the equity side. Okay. So and I like this quote. I was flicking through this Hyman Minsky book. Professor Steve Keen told me this is the best book that Hyman Minsky wrote. And I was flicking through it, and somehow I just came across this quote, and it shows that this cash is different than what economists normally think of as money. When economists say cash, they don't necessarily mean physical like coins and banknotes. They can mean central bank reserves, although it could mean electronic money. The way that the Federal Reserve System is set up, it's not quite like that. But what it means is that it has a special virtue that its availability does not depend upon the normal function of any market. Like, you don't need a creditor-debtor relationship. It can be just created unilaterally. Doesn't mean that? Okay. All right, money is, we covered that. Okay. Money and sustainability. Money should reflect reality. And then when people are doing economic models, they talk about stocks and flows. And a stock is like how much of the amount of something at a particular time, and that is in accounting that's represented by a balance sheet. And then a flow is like the movement or transfer of things from one place to another, and that is usually represented by an income statement. So, and the system should reflect reality, and everything in our world is dynamic. we're not sort of frozen. And our monetary system should not impose an artificial burden on us. Like if you've got, if your way of getting basically a ticket to access the wealth that the whole society produces, if the only way to get that ticket is to go into debt to the ticket maker and then have to pay them back, with interest, compounding, that's imposing an artificial burden on, being able to share the resources that we all have, I think. So, and also we need money that's originated not with a debt that needs to be paid back with interest, because we really need to start investing big time in basically conserving our biosphere and our ecosystems, our life support systems. We need to be able to invest money to pay people to not cut down trees. At the moment, they can only get money by cutting down trees. We need to pay people to not cut down trees. And so they're not going to be able to generate an income from not doing that. So we need a source of money that does not require generating an income to pay back the debt and interest to the originator. We need an originator of money that can just pay money out, invest it for the things that we need to do to stay alive on this world without having to increase economic activity and create pollution, and then to pay back on a treadmill to the originators who are at the moment of the banking system. Now, the banking system, they can't do that, be that originator, but sovereign governments can be that originator at the moment. So, really, our money should reflect the wealth. And Randy Cook's going to be talking about that more, so I won't get too much of that. But Stephen Zalanger liked to use this term, values for living. And so you can work out the International Accounting Fraternity, they've worked out ways of valuing not just physical capital and financial capital. They've now worked out frameworks for working out natural capital, the value of natural capital, the value of human capital, the value of social capital, the value of intellectual capital, for want of a better phrase, know-how, and the value of organisational capital, like knowing how to organise things to get things done. And all of these things are valuable as well. And money should just reflect that. And so, for example, in rural areas or like in indigenous people in rainforest or in coastal areas in Bangladesh or wherever, people need to be able to get an income not from destroying the environment, by clearing the mangroves to have agriculture, or by clearing the rainforest to raise cattle or whatever, soybeans. They need to be rewarded and acknowledged for the value of maintaining the ecosystems. They should be able to earn a living from maintaining our life support systems, at the lungs of the earth and the water filters of the earth. So there's a lot, regenerative agriculture that can draw down as much carbon as we need to draw down to restore the balance in the atmosphere. We don't need these high-tech, huge blimps with big carbon-sucking things that that Bill Gates wants to invest trillions of dollars in or billions of dollars in. That's just them. And of course, where would they get the finance for that? They have to go to the banking system, and you have to generate an income and pay back the debt and the interest, and it'd just be a big boondoggle for tech companies. It's really simple, plants, photosynthesis. One of the founding people that Randy Cook worked with, Charles Walters, he came to a lot of our conferences and used to start off just explaining how, the sun and photosynthesis and all that, and he says, am I making sense? And everyone was saying, yes, this makes sense, yeah, we know about this. Yeah. Okay, so you can have carbon farming, mangrove restoration, like I mentioned. Need to pay people to do it. I'll cut through, that was from another thing. Okay, and so we can also, in the urban areas as well, we can do a lot of the things that local governments don't have the money to pay for at the moment to make you know, cities are a nicer place to live in as well. And, you know, public transport, and, you know, we can also have clean air in the cities as well, and can have local produce even in the cities, vertical gardening and all that. And so all these ideas are there, and basically what's missing is the money. So here's Aristotle again. So money, the demand should match the goods, which is the supply. And this one's from Julius Paulus. So he was like a big sort of law guy in Rome, I think it was. And so his definition was a device whose legal and permanent value being officially promulgated, circulated, and maintained its purchasing power from its quantity. Since that time, only one consideration in exchange is called merchandise, the other is called price. Now, what price should that merchandise go for? And that's what Randy Cook's going to be talking about, how to have a fair and stable system for that. Again, there's the Constitution, and the uppercase coin there, that is a noun, and that referred to other currencies. At the time, there was other currencies circulating, the founding of the US, and also the US Treasury, even now, in its mandate, is to have control or to intervene in foreign exchange rates and foreign exchange markets. And Randy Cook's going to talk a bit about what's called equitable trade, which is a way to basically make that fair for both the US and for the rest of the world. And I think it's really important, so but I'll leave that to Randy to explain. And notice there's a correspondence in the Constitution with money and value, and there's also a correspondence with weights and measures, which is, you know, science. And the weights and measures part of this constitutional power is vested in the what used to be called Weights and Measures Bureau. I think it's now part of NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, and that's in the Department of Commerce. So that part of this clause is in the Department of Commerce, and the money part should be vested, well, the department that fits with that is the Department of the Treasury. So a lot of people concerned about, oh, well, you can't have, Congress can't delegate that power to the executive branch. Well, they've delegated the weights and measures part to the executive branch, so, you know, they can delegate the other part to the Treasury. Otherwise, you know, withdraw NIST and put it in some part of Congress, but I don't see how that would work. Okay, so this, after 12 years of study and 800 source materials, this is basically the conclusion that Stephen Zelenga came up with for defining money. Money's essence, apart from whatever is used to signify it, is an abstract social power embodied in law. So social power embodied in law, and the way we do that is democracy, as an unconditional means of payment. Now, unconditional means that you pay the money, you get whatever it is you're paying the money for. You don't have to have made any prior arrangements. You know, it's not like a debt contract. You don't have to do anything afterwards. It's not like a contract where you have to do something after. It's just an exchange of money for whatever it is that the money is being used to obtain. So unconditional means of payment, that is embodied in our legislation as making it clear what that means for money, rather than credit. So credit is something different. Credit is a promise to pay, or it's an IOU. It means that you have to have some sort of arrangement at different periods of time. Whereas with money, it's like, boom, swap. Okay, so the Need Act was first introduced in 2010, but then it was reintroduced in 2011 as HR 2919. And really, I mean, there have been a lot of good bills introduced into Congress in the 1930s, but this was really the first one that put it all together as far as we're concerned for in the 225 years since the Constitution and the start of the US government. And it defines money as an unconditional means of payment. And so the ethos behind it was to not, it was sort of, Stephen Zalanger and thought that our best opportunity would come in a time of when there's like a crisis. And so the NEED Act, what that means, it stands for, the NEED stands for National Emergency Employment Defence Act. So it's a way of dealing with a crisis and making sure that people still got a means of carrying on producing, carrying on being paid, so that we don't go into a Mad Max type situation. I don't know if you're familiar with the film Mad Max, but yeah. Okay, so and to do that in a non-destructive way. So whatever bank account balance you have in your bank now, and whatever credit limit you have on a credit card, all of that would stay the same. For you, your money would still be your money, you'd still have access to it, and it would be good money. It's not going to cause any upheaval. You know, you don't have to join a street committee, or you don't have to join a co-op or whatever to start to be able to get a loaf of bread. You'll still be able to, everyone will be getting paid, the deliveries will still be being made. It's good. There's no need, you know, for a massive disruption, because that could be bad. Okay, so, and it's ready to go. And you know, the principals, the banks, they have pretty secure cryptography for their messaging systems and their payment systems. Now, there's a lot of talk about blockchain or distributed ledgers or mutually distributed ledgers, and that is an interesting technology, and it could become a part of a future national monetary system, just like it's a part of, you know, the crypto assets at the moment. But it's not necessary. The current infrastructure is adequate to handle this system, because it's handling the system now. You know, usually when money goes missing from in the banking system, it's because it's someone on the inside of the bank. As far as I know, nobody's really hacked into the banking system. Or if they have, it's been tracked and traced, and then it's been tracked down. So, okay, so what it does for you, like I said, you still have your bank account money, but actually it's better than that, because the money in your bank account will actually be your money. At the moment, legally, you may not know this, but this is true, legally, your money in your bank account is treated as your unsecured loan to your bank. Your bank is a debtor to you, but they don't guarantee that debt to you. That's why that's why the FDIC was set up, because the bank doesn't guarantee that they'll be able to pay out your money in cash or whatever at any time. So that's why the FDIC was needed to be set up, after a lot of banks, you know, had runs and they just closed up in the Great Depression. So what our legislation does is it actually makes your money in your bank account your money, nobody else's, not loaned to anybody. It's basically like having an electronic safety deposit box, or an electronic safe, or like an electronic wallet, like, you know, a lot of people who transfer crypto assets have. So, and it also, because then the government guaranteeing the banking system, if they go wrong, that gets rid of the moral hazard of banks being able to go rampant, because they know that if things go bad, the government will bail them out because they have to keep the payment system going, so that there's not, you know, Mad Max. So what it does for society is it makes all US dollars an asset of the holder and a liability to nobody, the same as US coins are now, or treasury currency as the Fed calls it. And it eliminates the rentier. You know, Henry George people, they know all about rent, economic rent, and a private monetary system is basically like a private rent on the money supply. And so, like with the land and resources rent, this is another rent that is equally bad, I'd say. So we've gone through that. Okay, so The American Monetary Institute has been running conferences every year since 2005, and I went to the first one in 2005, and I've been going basically to every time since. And at the first one I met Randy, and then later on met Joe, and met a lot of you other people here today. And one there was a guy who was interested in coming. There's a guy called Dr. Michael Kumhoff, and he worked with the IMF. And when we saw that he registered, we thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I suppose he's going to tell us we're all wrong, but no, he just sat and listened, and he was interested. He came back about 3 years in a row, and he bought Stephen's book, The Lost Science of Money, and he read it 3 times through, which is, I've only read it once myself.
Like every day.
Yeah. So, and then that inspired him to write this this IMF working paper called The Chicago Plan Revisited, and on page 6 he basically explains it as money is therefore, he's explaining how to transfer the current system into the current debt or bank credit system into a sovereign money system. And so he says that money is therefore properly treated as a government equity rather than government debt, which is exactly how Treasury coin is currently treated under US accounting conventions, which I showed you before. And government-issued money which represents equity in the Commonwealth rather than debt, the central liquid asset of the economy. I really love the phrase equity in the Commonwealth, and because it brings in the idea of the commons, which is something which I know that Henry George people are very, that's based, the land or resources, that's commons. We've basically had our commons stolen from us in so many different ways. And of course our money system should be part of our commons as well. It's something we all need, it's something that was a human invention, like the wheel or the lever. Nobody knows who invented them, but we make use of those things every day, those inventions every day. And nobody's claiming to own the wheel or own the lever anymore, and nobody should be claiming to own money. It should be held in common for the benefit of us all.
Amen.
So the 3 key elements is to put the Fed in the Treasury, because the other parts, the other monetary authorities in the Treasury, the Mint and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, they're already bureaus of the Treasury, so this just puts the electronic part of the money supply into the Treasury as well. Stop banks creating money in a simple and non-disruptive accounting change, which I'll show you briefly, but I know I want to get to our next speaker, but if we want to get into some of the technical details, there's more slides and we can go through some of those mechanisms. And to create money for the general welfare, the first issues of money should be spent for things that we all need, like we all need clean air, clean water, nutritious food, I'd say. We need roads, everybody needs, things need to be transported. So public infrastructure, basically. And so, it's a bit hard to read. Basically, the governing principle of the monetary authority is to make sure that there's not inflation or deflation, but that goods can exchange, in a balanced manner. So it's not, and the important thing is, a lot of people are concerned, this monetary authority, they'll be lording it over everybody. But no, they are being paid out of a budget, which is appropriated, by Congress. The same at the moment, the Federal Reserve, they're not part of the US government's budget. They fund themselves from the profits that they make from their part of the money creation game. And but no, this will bring all of it under the same scrutiny and checks and balances as all the other government functions of government, and they don't get to decide where the money goes. The monetary authority, they've got no interest. At the moment, banks are creating money and they decide where it goes. They decide who gets it, on what terms, what conditions, what gets funded, what doesn't get funded. Do cluster bombs get funded? Yes. Does restoring the riparian zones of streams and rivers get funded? No. Okay. But those decisions should be made democratically. Not all the job of this authority, this monetary authority, is to decide how much money. And they wouldn't even be deciding it really. They'd be planning lots of statistics, and they'd be basically measuring the effect of inflation and things, all the things that are being done now, the Bureau of Labour Statistics and all the other economic analysis, Bureau of Economic Analysis, they all have various methods. And they would just be being held responsible for making the right decisions. And if they don't make the right decisions, well, they can lose their jobs. But they've got no interest in what the money is used for. So you've got a separation there. You've got a separation of responsibility for something, but without a vested interest in it. And I think that's really important. That you should focus one area of activity without it being polluted with other conflicts of interest. Basically, you want to eliminate, I think this does, eliminate conflicts of interest. At the moment, the Federal Reserve System, their stockholders are their member banks. They want to keep their stockholders whole. They want to keep their primary interest is to keep their member banks from getting into trouble, because they're required by law to pay a dividend to their stockholders, the stockholder banks. So that is a conflict of interest with administering or maintaining price stability and maximum employment, all the other things they're supposed to do. If they've got this commercial relationship with banks, they make loans to the member banks. They want to get those loans repaid. They've got a commercial involvement with their member banks, and they've got supposedly got this other function, a quasi-governmental function. I think that's a conflict of interest. I think banks should be able to operate on themselves. They're big boys and girls, and government functions should be run through the normal functions of government, democracy, Congress, all that, and hopefully more participatory democracy, more direct democracy. We can always improve on it. I'm not saying we can't improve on it, we really can, we have to. Okay, so I'll go through this and come back to it. Okay, so one of the main objections of what we propose, monetary reform, in the government creating money, says, oh, well, that'll cause inflation, because people always refer to the Weimar hyperinflation in Germany or Zimbabwe, and well, with the Weimar hyperinflation, that was not the government printing money and spending. That was a problem.